Hello everyone, this is News Distillate, your go-to source for daily news updates, where we will provide you with the latest news without taking up too much of your time. And now, let's get started with our first news with my co-host Emma.
Good evening everyone, thank you Hussein. I'm Emma and I'm here to bring you the latest news from Ukraine. This past week, China's special envoy Li Hui has been on a tour of Europe trying to get countries to talk about a political settlement between Russia and Ukraine. The United Nations Security Council is also going to be discussing how to protect people in conflict. One of the big developments from the past week is that Ukraine's President Zelenskyy has scored a major victory in getting F-16 training from the US. This is a big deal because F-16s are some of the most advanced fighter jets in the world. It's a big step up for Ukraine's military capabilities. On the other hand, Russia has been making some bold claims. They say they've taken control of the city of Bakhmut, which is in the eastern part of Ukraine. This has been disputed by Ukraine, who say that Russia is just trying to stir up trouble. So that's the latest news from Ukraine. It's a complicated situation, but hopefully the talks between China and Europe will help lead to a peaceful resolution. What news do you have for us, Hussein?
Oh, today we have some interesting news. The European Union is looking to challenge China's dominance in the solar power industry, and it's all happening in the midst of Li Hui's tour. This comes as Ukraine scores a victory with US F-16 training, and Russia claims control of Bakhmut, a region disputed by Ukraine. The title of this news is, China dominates the solar power industry. The EU wants to change that. China has become a major player in the solar power industry, and the EU is looking to change that. In 2012, Germany was a market leader in solar power, thanks to the government incentivizing solar panels with feed-in tariffs. This made Germany a global leader in solar power, putting the country at the center of the industry's research and development. However, in 2013, the German government changed the law, making renewables more expensive. This caused the industry to collapse, and 70,000 people in Germany's solar industry lost their jobs. Hecate Solar, a German solar firm, is one of the few manufacturers left in the once popular renewable energy park known as Saxony's Solar Valley. The industry moved from Germany to Asia due to free research centres, governmental research centres on the site of the producers, and subsidised energy. This made life easier in China. Joachim Goldbeck, CEO of Goldbeck Solar, says the only way to go against this is for someone to develop a similar strategy. Katrin Uhlig, a German member of parliament, says the EU is poised to offer big incentives. The EU aims for at least 80% renewable energies in the electricity sector by 2030. Germany is also working on similar measures, and Uhlig says if they had more renewable energy sources, they wouldn't be as dependent on fossil fuels. Erfurt, the CEO of Meyer Burger, says the biggest challenge is time. He says it's taking the EU Parliament too long to pass a bill that would generate clean tech investment. This is why Meyer Burger has decided to build its next big solar panel plant in Arizona, to take advantage of tax credits in the US Inflation Reduction Act. Uwe Krautwurst, head of marketing at Hecate Solar, says an ongoing Chinese monopoly of the world's solar panels is dangerous. He says if the EU doesn't act fast, there will be no industry, no further research, and no further developments in the European Union. So the EU is looking to challenge China's dominance in the solar power industry. Germany and the EU are working on measures to incentivize solar power, and the US is offering tax credits to encourage the industry. It's an exciting time for the solar power industry, and we can only hope that the EU will act quickly to help bring back the industry in Germany. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you, Hussein. It seems that AI technology has been used for some not-so-good purposes recently. On Monday morning, a false alarm was spread on Twitter with an AI-generated image of an explosion at the Pentagon. This caused a brief dip in the stock market. The image was of a black cloud of smoke near a building, and some accounts claimed it was the Pentagon. The accounts that shared the false image included an impersonating Bloomberg News and the real account of the Kremlin-linked Russian news service RT. Twitter later suspended the fake Bloomberg account, and RT deleted their post. AI technology has become increasingly advanced, and it can be used to create convincing images. This is a reminder of the importance of verifying information before sharing it. It's also important to be aware of the potential consequences of sharing false information. In this case, the false image caused a dip in the stock market. So it's important to be mindful of the information we share online. Back to you, Hussein.
Thank you, Emma. Today, we're talking about the record fine of $1.3 billion imposed on Meta by the European Union for allegedly violating data privacy standards. It's a hefty fine, and it's a reminder that we must be careful about the information we share online. AI technology has made it easier to create convincing false images, which can have serious consequences, such as the dip in the stock market seen recently. Our sources say that the fine is due to Meta transferring personal data of Europeans to the United States, where the EU worries that the data could be accessed by US national intelligence services. But Meta says there's no way to avoid sending data to the US. This is because Europe has very strict data privacy laws, while the US does not have a national data privacy law. So what does this mean for us? Well, if the fine and order holds up in court, it could affect many companies. It could also mean that Meta might have to pull all its services, such as Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram, out of the EU. This could have a huge impact on how we share content, communicate and interact with each other, especially with friends and family in Europe. But for now, there shouldn't be any service disruptions for Europeans or anyone else. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that Meta can appeal this order and fine. In the meantime, let's be mindful of the information we share online and make sure we're verifying it before we post it.
That's a huge fine, Hussein. What does this mean for us?
Well, if the fine and order holds up in court, it could affect many companies. It could also mean that Meta might have to pull all its services, such as Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram, out of the EU. But for now, there shouldn't be any service disruptions for Europeans or anyone else. OK then, what's our next news, Emma?
Thank you, Hussein. We all know that climate change is a serious issue that affects us all. But did you know that it's also affecting our furry friends? Researchers have been studying chipmunks to learn how different species can adapt and survive in a changing environment. Chipmunks are small, squirrel-like animals that are found in North America. They come in two varieties, the specialized alpine chipmunk and the more generalist yellow pine chipmunk. With the climate warming, these two species have developed different ways of coping. The alpine chipmunk is more specialized and can only survive in high-altitude areas. As the climate warms, these areas are becoming increasingly inhospitable, leaving the alpine chipmunk in a tough spot. On the other hand, the yellow pine chipmunk is more generalist and can survive in a wider variety of habitats. This means that the yellow pine chipmunk is better able to adapt to a changing climate. Kawasi, a researcher studying the chipmunks, says that the chipmunks might provide broader insights into what types of species are more vulnerable to climate change. It seems that the less specialized species are better able to adapt and cope with the current levels of climate change. So, while climate change is a serious issue that affects us all, it's nice to know that some species are able to adapt and survive. We can all take a lesson from the chipmunks and strive to be more resilient to the unpredictable. Back to you, Hussein.
Thank you, Emma. It's no surprise that Donald Trump and William Jennings Bryan have been compared to one another. After all, both men have been able to adapt to changing climates, whether political or environmental, much like the yellow pine chipmunk. But while the two have similarities, there's one major difference between them. Trump has already served a term in the White House. Bryan was born and educated in Illinois and moved to Nebraska after law school. He was elected to Congress at the age of 30 and soon became an outspoken champion for farmers, free trade and free silver. An effort to ease the repayment of debts by breaking away from the gold standard for fixing the value of currency. His populist crusade could be traced back to Andrew Jackson and Thomas Jefferson, the progenitors of the Democratic Party. Trump, on the other hand, is a plutocrat who plastered his name on luxury towers in Manhattan. Despite their differences, both men had points of intersection and commonalities of interest and style that could not be ignored. They were both tall and imposing physically and had commanding voices that could hold a crowd for an hour or more. Trump was able to break out among white evangelical Protestants in the South Carolina primary in 2016, and the map of the November 2016 election wound up looking notably similar to the map of Bryan's first presidential bid in 1896. Trump's chief strategist, Stephen Bannon, even said that Trump was probably the greatest speaker in those large arenas since William Jennings Bryan. But despite Trump's success in the 2016 election, a clear majority of voters overall do not want him back in the White House. Bryan was nominated for president 3 times, but lost twice to William McKinley and once to William Howard Taft. After his last failed attempt, he devoted his later years to what he saw as moral crusades, including a form of evangelical Protestant Christianity. In 1925, he agreed to serve as the lead prosecutor in the trial of a small-town Tennessee schoolteacher named John Scopes, who had violated a state law against teaching evolution. Populism has often had a strong admixture of nativism, resistance to cultural change or diversity, and outright racism. Bryan himself was resistant to immigration, especially from China, and showed little concern for the condition or political standing of African Americans. This kind of populism was glaring in the 1960s and 1970s campaigns of George Wallace, the defiantly segregationist governor of Alabama. The Tea Party triumph of 2010 was a clear reprise of the conservative populist impulse and set the stage for the age of Trump. We can be sure Trump will continue striving to strike the populist chord as a candidate in 2024, but whether he'll be successful or not is still up in the air.
Hussein, you've just made some great points about the similarities and differences between Donald Trump and William Jennings Bryan. What do you think will happen in the 2024 election?
Well, Emma, I think Trump will definitely try to strike a populist chord as a candidate, but whether or not he'll be successful is still up in the air. Okay then, what's our next news, Emma?
Thank you, Hussein. It's a scary thought, but if Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling, the U.S. could default on its debts. That means the government won't have enough money to pay its bills. It's like when you don't have enough money in your bank account to pay for something. It's a big deal. Veterans, seniors, and government employees are some of the people who will be affected the most. The U.S. owes $12 billion in veterans' benefits on June 1st. And if there's not enough money to pay them, veterans who have already sacrificed a lot for their country will have to sacrifice even more. That means they won't have enough money to pay for housing, food, or their children's expenses. Social Security recipients will also be affected. The government owes $25 billion in Social Security benefits on June 2nd. If that money doesn't come through, people with little or no savings might have to turn to credit cards, which have high interest rates. The housing market could also take a hit. Mortgage rates could go up to 8.4%, which would make homes too expensive for many people. It's not just veterans and seniors who will be affected. Food stamp recipients, education programs, and defense contractors could all be left without money. It's really frustrating that Congress is playing games with people's lives. Veterans advocate Cole Lyle says it's time for Congress to act like adults and do their jobs. It's important to remember that a default doesn't just affect the government, it affects all of us. So let's hope Congress can come to an agreement and raise the debt ceiling. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you again tomorrow.